Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're taking a look at overclocking on Supermicro's C9 X299-PG300 with i9-7960X. Now we got to go to the advanced mode first, and then we're going to go to the CPU overclocking menu. We're going to look at the ratios right now. Those are default turbo ratios per number of cores used, but we're going to go to all core OC setting, and we're going to set that at 4.5 gigahertz. It's very important to use all core OC setting. Now we're going to basically, you can go to 5.2 if you want, but we're basically now going to go to the last menu at the bottom of this page called Processor, and we're going to click on it. We can set our offsets, but we're just going to go to Processor right now. Now the only thing we've got to change here is we've got to set the current limitation to its maximum, and if you hover over it, that's 2048. So we're going to delete what's in there right now by clicking on it, backspace, and then we're going to type in 2048. And we're going to do a consistent overclock first, which basically means the CPU ratio will stay high. So we're going to hardware PM state control. Now inside of here, we're going to disable hardware PM state control, and that will basically allow the OS to control. Basically, lets software control the PM state, power management state. And we're going to also go and disable our C states. This makes things a little bit easier. We got to scroll all the way down again, and we're going to click on that menu, and we're going to disable C1E and set our package C state to C0/1, which is the most awake state. We still might have one or two cores go down and flip-flop, but most of them will stay at maximum all the time under the high-performance power plan. So now we're going to go back out to memory overclocking. Yeah, we might as well do memory overclocking right now. We're just going to set XMP. This motherboard is actually pretty decent. We can do quad channel 3600 megahertz, and make sure you set that memory voltage correctly. Now it'll auto set 1.350, and you notice all the timings are set for you. One cool thing you can do here is actually individually tune the timings from XMP. So if you want to tighten them, that's one cool feature Supermicro allows you to do. So it keeps all the XMP settings and allows you to basically lower them one by one if you so choose. Now we're going to go back and we got to do voltage changes, right? So we're right now on adaptive, which allows dynamic voltage, but we want it to be constant since our CPU frequency would be constant. So we're going to change that to override. And we'll go over adaptive soon. So override, we're going to try 1.2 volts. And on a Supermicro motherboard, you type in 1200. It's in millivolts. So times 1,000 basically. And you also have an offset value if you want to set that, and the offset prefix. So when you use adaptive, you might see setting 1200 will give you 1.24 volts. So you might want to set a 40 and then a negative offset, and that would give you 1.2 volts. So that we can take care of later. I'm not even going to really mess with that too much because it doesn't really make too much difference in my temperatures, which is really what we're aiming for. Okay, and now we go to CLR/ring, and this is your mesh frequency. We're going to set this to 30x, although this CPU can do 32. Just for this video, we're going to do 30x, which is 3 gigahertz, which is a pretty decent overclock. We're going to also change this to override, and you can go a little bit higher than vCore on this. We're going to do 1.25. I think that should be okay. 1.25 is enough for 32x, but we'll let it sit there for now. Every CPU is different, of course. Now we go to uncore, and this uncore setting is an internal one, and we're going to lower that because the auto rules are too high here. 250 is enough. This might be called system agent voltage or internal system agent voltage on some other motherboards, but here it's called uncore. Now we're going to go to SVID/F5ER, and we're going to leave this enabled, and we're going to override that voltage to 2100, which is basically 2.1 volts. That's your input voltage. Then you have your external VCSA, which was too high. We're going to take that down to 1.25 and 1.150 on the VCCIO. These are still kind of really high. Not really high, but they're kind of at the maximum values. We want to make sure everything's good. We're going to leave LLC on auto, but as you see, you have 7 levels as well as disabled. We're all good here. No need to touch everything. Supermicro's done a decent job with this. The VRM is optimized already. No need to increase like thermal or whatever. And now we're good. We're going to go here and change some boot settings because we like to come in the advanced mode, not the easy mode. So we're going to go change that to advanced mode. And then we're going to go and make sure fast boot is on, enabled. All right. So this is a server system. So we can press F4 and that will bring us to our save and exit menu. So we hit F4 and you might see that the boot might take a little while. This board actually likes to boot. It's pretty good at booting. But yeah, so Supermicro motherboards sometimes, I mean, they're built from server motherboards, and server motherboards initialize everything. Even fast boot is not extremely fast at the BIOS portion, but you can make sure it's definitely training your memory, it's definitely programming in all your overclocks correctly, and as we will see when we boot into Windows, everything is fine. If you want to get in the BIOS, you hit delete. I would hit it after your keyboard lights come on. Because if you hit it too soon, sometimes there's some issue with certain things, where if you hit it too soon, sometimes it doesn't boot, and this is common on a lot of motherboards. During post, if you just keep hitting delete over and over again before it's ready to actually go in, you're going to mess with this. So a good tip, keep in mind, is when you see any other keyboard light comes on, this is with any motherboard, not only Supermicro, then hit delete. So when you see that like number lock light come on or your LEDs come on, then hit delete a few times. Let's go to CPU Z, and we're going to see what CPU Z has to offer. We can just close down this Turbo Max 3 software. Here we see 4.5 gigahertz, all cores are 4.5, maybe one or two cores go up and down, but stable. And we see our note bridge frequency, that'll bump up when we run Cinebench. I'm going to show you guys something cool too, why increase that input voltage to 2.1 from 1.8. That's the default, by the way. And input voltage is different than your V-core. Read our article on the same thing if you're curious as to why. So we see that went up. We see all cores are at 4.5, none are lagging. And we're going to get like around 3,800, 3,900. Yeah, 3,884. Great score. Solid score for the CPU. Right where it should be at this overclock. Now we're going to use SuperO Booster. This is Supermicro's software application. It's lightweight. It does everything you need. And it's good for in-Windows tuning. You can change the multipliers, the frequency, and we've done a full overview of this software before, so just look on our Facebook page. So here's our menu. It looks kind of like the UEFI, right? We see vCPU, that's your input voltage, is 2.1 volts. This is really the only place you can read that voltage. Now we're going to go set that to 1.8, and once we set that at 1.8, but yeah, might as well take a look at some of the other stuff first. Thermals, your fans, memory, your memory timing, CPU, you see all those ratios. You have some little controls for ICE or turbo. You got to leave both those enabled if you want to overclock, so don't disable those. So we're going to go to voltage. We're going to change that to 1.8, and we're not going to scroll, just going to type it in. And then we're going to apply it in real time. And we'll see the grayed out value next to it and the value up there, vCPU change. So 1.78 and then back to 1.8. And now we're going to run Cinebench again. And as you will see, frequencies are running where they should be, right? 4.5, all cores. And then go to the memory. And we see we're running 3 gigahertz on the mesh frequency, and we're running 3600. If you're wondering why it says 1800, it's because it's a double data rate, so you double it. All 32 gigs in quad channel. But you can even notice that the speed in the background is a little bit slower. How could a voltage affect whoa, right? Basically half the score. Now, just so those of you who say, oh, because the program was open, it's doing something. No, let's take it back to 2.1. Just say yes, hit apply, and we will see it jump back up. So basically what you saw is you got to increase that input voltage. A lot of motherboards have auto rules, but a lot also don't. Only one brand I know right now that puts auto rules on all its motherboards that take 2.1 volts, and you see backup as your basic input voltage. And yeah, almost basically every motherboard vendor should do it, but if you're saying at 1.8 input voltage, it's much easier for people to hit 5 gigahertz not knowing they're getting the performance less than 4 gigahertz, you know? So hit 2.1. If that ruins your overclock, basically means your overclock wasn't really working in the first place, you know? These CPUs should not be hitting 5 gigahertz without a lid. That's why we're at a nice 4.5. The CPU actually does 4.4 on most motherboards. Here we didn't have a problem hitting 4.5. It could be because of the VRM, could just be we're tuning a little bit more, but overall temperatures are good. H100i is what we're using. And we can see here HW Info is my program of choice for monitoring. It's a very good program, like a lot more than HW Monitor. Highly recommend it. Very good logging. You can even reduce the polling interval, so it polls a lot quicker and you might be able to catch things. Now we're going to run Handbrake, and Handbrake uses AVX, and this is like a light stability test I like to use. Cinebench is light, and it's good for performance scaling. Handbrake is a little bit heavier, has AVX, which Cinebench doesn't, and has a performance metric. So we're going to use the normal profile. We're going to take a 4K video down 1920. This is basically what a lot of people do. I do this often. I did it with this video. So we're going to run this. Our cores are going. You see that's like all the way raised to maximum voltage on the V core reported by CPU Z and 45X. We look at our temperatures. We want to make sure nothing is over 80. And right now we're seeing things in the 60s as max, and that's solid. We're seeing our multiplier is solid, 45 all the way. Our uncore ratio, which is really our mesh clock, is 30x. And so mesh can also be called uncore, or it could be called cache. It's the internal frequency of the interconnect between the cores. It's important in certain benchmarks and certain programs. So I would overclock it. I wouldn't just overlook it, you know. So yeah, we're running okay. Everything looks good. We're going to see if this passes. Now, after this passes, if you're good with this, you want all your cores to run as maximum as they can at all times, by all means, take out Prime 95 and go at it. If AVX is your problem, AVX actually increases temperatures a lot and power consumption a lot because AVX units are actual units inside the CPU that are activated when AVX is activated. That's why we have two AVX offset ratios in the UEFI we saw earlier. And so in that case, if I set an offset ratio of 2 for both AVX 2.3, 2 and 3, which I would use the same ratio, it would go to 4.3 gigahertz right now instead of 4.5. Well, it would go up and down depending on exactly when AVX was triggered. We're not going to really go over that here. I don't really like setting that. I feel like might as well run it whatever. AVX could be anywhere at any time, so might as well make sure it's stable under that. So yeah, so let's see what's going on here. Okay, so package power, minimum was 51 watts, maximum 262. And that CPU package power is not a real way of measuring package power. It's kind of like a pseudo package power. I know some sites use that. They really shouldn't, especially not for a real CPU review. Yeah. A more consistent way would be use the same motherboard with varying CPUs, same VRM efficiency, and measure the input, or do a DCR at the inductor. That'd be probably the most efficient, other than using Intel's internal tool. We see we got 103 FPS, and that's a little performance counter, right? We want to see if we can get the same thing using more dynamic mode. In this more dynamic mode, we're going to hand over hardware P-state controls to the hardware of the CPU, and let the CPU go up and down. It's not going to really care what you set in the power plan in Windows, whereas when we hit high performance, most of the time it stayed at maximum frequency, at least most cores did. And that's why CPU-Z reported it as like 4.5 all the time. That's a lot of people like that, and they want to set voltage. So now we're going to go back in the BIOS, press delete. And we're going to head back in there. We're going to change our voltage modes to adaptive, and we're going to go change certain other things. So we're going to go back to that processor menu at the bottom here. Now, at this processor menu at the bottom, we're going to go ahead and re-enable our hardware P-state control. Forget if it was native or out of band. We'll just go with native mode. Shouldn't be too different here. Yeah, we'll do native mode. Yeah, there we go. So we're going to do native mode. Make sure your P2 and P1 power limits are okay. And you can go re-enable your C states, but we're not even going to bother too much. You can, might as well. But we're going to go to our voltage configuration, change this to adaptive. Now I know it says extra turbo voltage. It's not extra turbo voltage. It's basically what your max turbo voltage will be. We're going to 1190 because I know it goes higher than that. We should really set negative offset here of like 30, but we're not going to bother. We're going to go here adaptive, and we're going to set this at, let's do 1225. Okay, that should be okay. It's going to be a little higher, but we have some thermal headroom, right? About 15 degrees Celsius. In this case. So that's about it. Save and exit. And our Windows plan is still going to be at high performance, but you're going to see the CPU frequency drop. You're going to see the vCore in CPU-Z drop. Not sure how exact that is. It's the internal CPU reporting to the vCore, and Skylake X has been out for a little bit. So things should be pretty good. We shouldn't have too much of an issue, but we're going to go back in and run the same things. First, we're going to run Cinebench just to make sure quickly that our performance is good. I mean, if you don't have to waste 5 minutes, why bother running it through Handbrake for a performance result? Why not just try Cinebench? It's consistent enough. It showed us really clearly how much input voltage affects the overclock. So some of you might be wondering, so what's input and what's VCC? vCore input is an input given to the internal voltage regulator of the CPU, and the CPU will then spit out a vCore and some other internal voltages, like the cache or the mesh voltage, that uncore voltage you saw. Those are all internally derived from the 1.8 volt that we took up to 2.1. And so we have a core V of is low, right? It's going down, right? It's 28. We say drop to 12. So now frequency is going to scale with performance. And so will vCore. And we should see like a 10, maybe 20 watt decrease at idle. And that's, I mean, not too crazy, but it's there. But we see we're 3 gigahertz on the mesh. Everything is good with memory. Everything is good with cores. But see, we set 1.9 and we're getting like 1.24. Yeah, it overdoes it, and that's why that negative offset option in the UEFI is open. And I showed you earlier, you can just set that to negative 40 or whatever. So you just go in, see what it is. And now we're going to set up Handbrake again. And let's see how it's doing. HW Info, my favorite. Yeah, HW Info has so many new versions, and I like to get the portable ones. They're a little bit easier to deal with. They don't really come with too much adware in them, or the option to install adware is not there in the mobile version or the portable one. So I highly recommend if you do HW Info 64, you do the portable one. So we're going to 1920, overwrite our initial test file, uh, set up. I gotta do this again. So we're gonna go look at HW info, and we're gonna look at that minimum package power. I mean, it's not wrong, but it's also not like probably 100% right. And it should be reported from the CPU, but there's always a possibility a motherboard vendor has gone and messed something up, or HW info has messed up some kind of offset. So let's overwrite. Starting now, you can see it's going up. Once it says prepared and encoded, and once it starts, now it should shoot. Yep, all cores 4500 and 1.24 volts. We should see slightly higher temperatures. Okay, notable frequency, mesh, same thing, working good. Now we're gonna go scroll down and we see we're gonna have to wait until it goes through everything. Temperatures are roughly the same. We see some things in the 70s where we might have not before. Now minimum package power is at 34, so we were at 50 something before, 54, 52, I don't know, but we're about 20 watts less at idle, which is a good savings. Now, people debate whether or not to use dynamic or fixed. And the argument is basically with dynamic, you might not be as stable, but I haven't really found that to be too much the case. But also with dynamic, you can have voltage spikes because the voltage is going up and down all the time, and there could be an overshoot or an undershoot. And depending on the voltage regulator quality, that could hurt your overclock and eventually hurt your CPU. So we don't want that to happen. And so we're going to basically go and ensure that doesn't happen by setting it VCore all the time. And as you see, the power savings are not like huge. When you're talking like 300 watts, 350 watts, which this system was pulling a lot more than what that package power reading there is. I think it was pulling around like 400 watts from the wall. And considering the GPU is idling right now, yeah, it's a lot of power. And that's a lot of voltage. Well, not a lot of voltage. That's a lot of current. Current makes up a lot of that power consumption. So I would definitely, you could do fixed dynamic if you're going for maximum performance all the time. But if you want to be nice to your CPU sometimes, and you have a really nice voltage regulator on your motherboard with really nice voltage regulation, something like this motherboard from Supermicro, then you might really consider dynamic and going through the extra effort to set that up. So that's as much as I think we'll cover right now. But yeah, let's check our score right around 103, 104. What do we get here as our average encoding speed? 103. So right about the same performance. So we're getting the basically same performance, but we are dropping down frequency and VCore during idle, which is a decent thing. All right. And I guess we'll look over SuperO Booster real quick because this is their in Windows overclocking software, and it works. It's light, doesn't seem to impact performance too much, which is a good thing. So here we have our CPU. We have monitoring in real time. We can set warning temperatures. We can look at our vCPU, and this is where you're going to find the monitoring of these internal rails because HW Info doesn't have it. Oh, on adaptive mode, you're going to see vCore and auto. I wouldn't mess with it. I really wouldn't. I would on adaptive mode, I definitely do that through the UEFI. You also have a normal mode profile, OC mode, and auto tuning. Right now, we've boosted 60% over 2.8 gigahertz, which is huge, all cores. Thermals where you set your fan and you have a bunch of different profiles and you have all 5 fan connectors. You can go customize and do these individual and you get a reference sensor right there. So they're all referencing the CP right now, all system fan headers. And so those temperatures are there so you can always change the reference. And you see the real-time reading up there in different colors so you can always change that to a system or peripheral or the PCH. Luminous is your RGB control. Right now, I think default was overclocking. BIOS update, here you say no if you don't want to do a risky update, and you can just go to a ROM on your desktop, taken out and update. And yeah, so another trick. So if you want to change all your CPU cores, if you want to take them all down at the same time, I would hit the first active core. Now, if you want to take them all up at the time, I would go to your last active core and hit up. Otherwise, you're going to have to every one of those 16 cores at the same time. And we can't apply it in real time, so I don't want to really mess with that right now. And you do have your XMP settings right there. What else? What else? Okay, I think that pretty much covers most of it. If you have any questions, please let us know.